Preserving social work history and honoring pioneers and role models, including many of my own, is so important because if you don't know your history, then you're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past or let others do that.
It shows those coming after us that there are things that need to be done, things that can be accomplished, and things that we need to work towards changing and making this world a little bit better for those that follow us.
It's an opportunity to remember those in the profession that have made significant contribution over time, and especially as they get older, sometimes we tend to forget the contribution that they have made.
When I heard that I had been nominated, I looked back, and some of my former colleagues have been inducted in prior years. So that kind of makes me feel kind of nice to be along with that group of people, friends that I knew.
The traits that people have who we select, one, they all have a master's degree in social work, but two, they have done some kind of practice where they've influenced the people of California for the better.
It's always a delight every year to hear about these tremendous accomplishments in our field. We have a great slate of inductees, and we have some prior inductees that are here too. But the really important thing is to celebrate social work's achievements and accomplishments, and to give people the kind of credit that they deserve for all their really hard work. And to celebrate that all together is one of the most wonderful things that we do all year. I am going to introduce first our Hall of Distinction Committee. So in your programs, you have the list of the Hall of Distinction members. It's a much larger group than is here today, but we have several people here today. So first off, me, I'm Colleen Friend. I'm the chair, and I already told you that, but in my other life, I am the chair of the Cal State LA School of Social Work. So the next one is Dr. Peter Allen Lee, and he's the director of the School of Social Work at San Jose State. And then we have Nancy Yim Lee, and Nancy Lim Yi is a retired practitioner from the San Francisco Department of Public Health. And we also have here Dr. Joseph Nunn, and he's a Maritime faculty from the UCLA School of Social Welfare. And we have Catherine Ralph, and she's going to later on be today's MC, and she's retired from the UC Berkeley School of Social Welfare. And of course, everybody knows Jan Lee Wong, the Executive Director of NASW California. So let's appreciate our board members here. So before we officially proceed to the induction of our new members, we have a few inductees from other classes in the audience today. So I'd like them to either stand or wave. Is Herman Gallegos here? He was from the class. Herman, thank you. Okay, class of 2011. And we also have Mariko Yamada. Mariko, you're here. Okay, class of 2013. And then Sandra Baker, class of 2013. So let's give these people a round of applause. Yeah. So we'd like to acknowledge the presence of the new dean of the School of Social Welfare at UC Berkeley, Linda Burton. Dr. Linda Burton, welcome to California. Also the principal investigator of CalSWIC. Okay. Also, I'd like to thank our sponsors. It's been really wonderful to have a growing list of sponsors. So this year we've had 30, and that's the most we've ever had for sponsors. And we want you to make sure that you acknowledge our sponsors. They are our collaborators here, and we are so appreciative that across the whole state of California and all of the schools of social work in California, we have co-sponsors who are wanting to further our mission of honoring the pioneering work of the inductees to the Social Work Hall of Distinction. I'd also like to thank our volunteers, because nothing gets done without the volunteers. Everybody got checked in today. Thank you. So we had some social work students volunteering, and we also had NASW California, the chapter of Northern California Asian Pacific Islander Council, also checking people in. So thank you very much for your volunteering. And now I'd like to bring up the president-elect of the California Social Welfare Archives, Maurice Hudson. Mr. Hudson is an expert in crisis intervention, case management, and foster care. And I've been sitting with Maurice and his lovely mother. So thank you for being here. And she was telling me just how proud she is of her son. He obtained his MSW at UC Berkeley and also his JD at Case Western Reserve. And he's a 2-for-1. He's both a social worker and a licensed attorney in the state of New York. And he teaches as a lecturer at the USC School of Social Work. So welcome, Maurice.
I have to confess that I'm a little bit out of my depth. Our current president is Esther Gillies, and for those of you who have the privilege of knowing her, she's been the president of CSWA, which is the organization in which the Hall of Distinction exists, since 2008. And under her leadership and guidance, the organization has thrived. And I have to say, I met Esther at USC a few years ago. She asked me to go to lunch. I thought she just liked me as a person. I was so flattered with myself, and she would take me out to lunch in Pasadena and buy me lunch, and we'd chat and talk. And little did I know that she was grooming me to become a board member of CSWA, because she'd heard me and my big mouth walking around campus talking about how we needed a history of social work class and how the current crop of social workers don't know about their history. And when I was advising students in our DSW program about their projects, they weren't thinking about the projects that came before and connecting it to the social workers who had already been there, who had already thought of some of the innovative ideas that they wanted to do. And so little did I know that Esther had even bigger plans for me, and that she was looking to eventually step down. And she asked me if I'd be interested in taking her place. I said that I would on one condition, and that was that she stayed for another year so that I could learn under her tutelage. Because I've learned enough from my mother and my grandmother and my former faculty advisor, Dr. Joelle Taylor-Gibbs, to know that there's a lot that I still don't know. So I'm very pleased that Esther took that interest in me, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. She told me to stick to the script that she wrote. So far, I haven't done that. So I want to tell you quickly a little bit about CSWA. So I see a lot of kids in the room. Hello, kids. Hello. I assume all of you are in school and you're learning history, right? So you're learning about George Washington, and you're learning about Booker T. Washington and all the Washingtons. Well, there's a history to social work, too. And that history is something that the California Social Welfare Archives takes very seriously. So CSWA is the organization responsible for this Hall of Distinction ceremony. About 40 years ago, a group of social workers who were active in the 50s and 60s decided that something needed to be done to make sure that the work that they were doing, the innovations that they were designing, the interventions that they were coming up with would live on, and that they would remain a part of the legacy of social work. They were thinking about retiring. They knew they were getting a little up in age. These are Esther's words, not mine. And so they were concerned that their programs and services might be lost. This small group was led by George Nickel and Francis Lomas Feldman, just two of the names. And in 1979, CSWA was formed, the same decade that I was formed. They first began operating as an informal group, collecting and preserving documents and personal histories related to social issues and problems. It then evolved into a statewide organization, and I think our inductees this evening really reflect that this is not just a Southern California organization or a USC organization, but truly values the legacy and history and work of social workers from up and down the state. And so for over 40 years, they've been collecting these papers, capturing documents, and now these are housed at the USC Special Collections Library. Our social work librarian is actually a board member, so we're talking about all kinds of ways to bring these documents to life, to digitize the collection and make sure that social workers in California and around the world have access to all of the amazing things that all of you have been doing over the past 40 years and beyond. In 2002, the Hall of Distinction became a part of CSWA. That turned out to be a great merger, and the CSWA continues in the efforts to partner with HOD to recognize and maintain the legacy of social workers who have made significant contributions to the field. We have a short video that describes CSWA and provides an overview of the organization. So I'd like you to direct your attention to that video now, and then I'll introduce you to our Mistress of Ceremonies.
1979, the California Social Welfare Archives, CSWA, was established by a small group of dedicated social workers who were deeply committed to ensuring that the theories, knowledge, and understanding achieved by their generation were preserved for future scholars, social welfare advocates, and social workers. That the countless advances achieved in social welfare during past decades would not fade away and be forgotten. And that past and present information would always remain available to inform students, historians, and those influencing programs, legislation, and social justice in California. CSWA has evolved into a statewide, nonprofit organization affiliated with the USC Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work and the USC Doheny Memorial Library Special Collections Department. Today, CSWA curates a rich, one-of-a-kind collection of social welfare documents and oral histories, which enables users to examine linkages between the past and present and develop deeper understandings of today's issues and create a historical foundation from which to address future social welfare problems and solutions. The archives houses over 400 collections of historical social welfare documents, some dating back to the 1880s. For example, CSWA holds the records of Rancho Los Amigos Hospital, which began as Los Angeles County's Poor Farm and became an internationally renowned rehabilitation hospital. CSWA's ever-expanding collection of over 125 oral history interviews, conducted over the past 3 decades, document the history and lessons of influential social workers and social welfare programs. These audio and video recordings have been accessed by thousands of visitors to the CSWA holdings and websites.
I've had many wonderful conversations with my grandparents and with my parents, but those conversations are all lost now because they were never recorded. The oral histories are something that we're going to treasure for years to come because these are not personal memories as much as they are memories of people that have made important and significant contributions to social work practice and policy.
The California Social Work Hall of Distinction creates an ongoing legacy of the accomplishments of extraordinary social workers who have made significant and enduring contributions to California social welfare. Honorees are selected annually by a statewide panel of social workers and are inducted into the hall, where the impact of their exceptional contributions is documented and preserved for future generations. Today, social work schools throughout California include the study of historical figures and social welfare innovators, whose biographies and interviews can be found on the Hall of Distinction website. Each year, CSWA also presents George Nickel Awards, named after its founder, to outstanding contributors to the health and welfare of California. The Francis Lomas Feldman Excellence in Education Award was established in 2010 to acknowledge exceptional contributions to social work education in California. Join us today to support the success and the future of the CSWA. Please visit www.usc.edu/CSWA.
I take a little bit of privilege to just make one more remark about Dr. Joelle Taylor-Gibbs. I'm not sure where she's sitting, but hello, Dr. Joelle. So Dr. Taylor-Gibbs was my faculty advisor, and I will never forget when I went to her as I was completing my MSW at Berkeley, and I told her, I think I want to go to law school. I really also want to be an attorney. And she said to me, and I'll never forget this, because nowadays the kids have this expression that they call keeping it 100. She said to me, you have a little bit of growing up to do. You need to do some maturing first. So I'd like to see you get out there and work and then go back to law school. And that's exactly what I did. And I don't think I would be standing here today if that hadn't been the case. And I really valued just your directness and your honesty and your candor, and you're taking the time to get to know me, and it meant the world to me, so thank you so much. Thank you. Love you too. So I'll dispense with all that. And thanks to my mom, who's also here, who's been at all of my graduations and everything, so, okay. It's now my pleasure to introduce our Mistress of Ceremonies. She is another very familiar face in the statewide social work landscape. She is the past president of the NASW California chapter. She's a very active member of the Hall of Distinction Committee. There's a meeting on Tuesday, by the way, or Thursday. She's also retired as the Title IV-E project coordinator. She was a field consultant and lecturer at UC Berkeley School of Social Welfare, and we couldn't be more thankful to have Kathy here as our MC today. So please join me in welcoming Kathy Ralph to the stage.
So good afternoon, and I'd like to add my welcome to all of you for the 2019 Hall of Distinction induction ceremony, and it's my honor to be your Mistress of Ceremonies. As your host, I'll be making some general introductions of each presenter for each new honoree and moving the program along during the next hour and a half or so. Of course, we could spend the whole afternoon on any one of them, honoring each one of them, but tonight our challenge is to show respect to all of them, all 6 of them. And to that end, we've provided summary biographies in your program. That commemorative program is something you can take with you, and you'll always have those biographies as a part of your mementos of today. In addition, conversations with them might be videoed at UC Berkeley in the coming weeks and then posted to the website, added to an oral history collection at the CSWA. The brief comments that you'll hear from this podium are intended to enhance, not replace or review those materials that are in your programs. So the 2019 inductees into the California Social Work Hall of Distinction each earned a master's in social work or social welfare, which is the minimum requirement for being in the hall. But beyond that, they were nominated by some of their colleagues, other social workers, for their contributions to positive social changes in California. Their nominations were reviewed by our committee, and these 6 inductees tonight were selected by the Hall of Distinction Committee, composed of social workers from throughout the state. And the selection criteria included these things. They show exceptional leadership in social work practice, education, research, or social policy in California. They did some risk-taking to achieve the outstanding results in social policies or programs, and particularly during controversial historical periods. They were effective advocates against potentially harmful social policies on behalf of clients and communities, and extending into social programs to underserved populations. They made extraordinary contributions to social work practice or the applications of techniques. They initiated innovative research or programs producing positive, tangible results over a period of time. So any one of these 6 has some combination of all those criteria there. All the committee members are also listed in your programs. We're a diverse group representing academia, research, administration, individual, group, and community practice, public service, philanthropy, and many areas across the broad spectrum of social work in California. From the many nominations submitted, today's 6 were selected for induction into the 2019 California Social Work Hall of Distinction. So let's begin. We are essentially following alphabetical by last name, and I'm going to bring up to the podium Dr. Peter Allen Lee. Dr. Lee is the Director of Social Work, the School of Social Work at San Jose State University. He's the son of Chinese immigrants, and like me, a native of San Francisco. He enjoys a servant leader approach to life and he will proudly introduce our next inductee, Dr. Salvador Alvarez, who will be the 7th person with connections to San Jose State University inducted into our Hall of Distinction. I've known Peter since he was a doctoral student at Berkeley, when he shared an office down a short hall from my own space. And I know he has earned the deep respect of his colleagues as a kind, thoughtful, and competent professional and an adept administrator.
So Kathy, I must say, actually the first time we met was I was an undergraduate student in your Social Work 103 course, so that's fine. It's, yeah, so, I just must say that it is a privilege to just be part of this, because in terms of the influence, the future, the past that is going to also shape what's going to be happening, not only in our profession, but our world. It is amazing how much power is in this room, and power in a positive and a good way. I'm also a little bit intimidated because 2/3 of my dissertation committee are in the room still. But that's fine. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to all of you who are here. Thank you for really making social work and our society so much better, whether you're a student, a colleague, a professor, a professional, or just a person, because the goodness that comes out of people is really what's going to change the world. So thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce our first inductee this year, Salvador Alvarez. His wife, Sylvia Alvarez, and the Alvarez family will be accepting in his honor, on his behalf. A full description of Salvador's achievements is in your program, and they're seated right here. A graduate from both San Jose State University and the University of California, Berkeley, Salvador Alvarez dedicated his life to social justice causes and the advancement of professional social work values and principles. His noted achievements include work with the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops and the United Farm Workers Union, also working closely with Dolores Huerta. He had held several positions of influence and received numerous awards and recognitions during his journey that involved advocacy and landmark legislative work, formation and founding of influential programs, including work to establish the Social Work Graduate Program at San Jose State. It'll be celebrating its 50th anniversary officially, although social work education started a little bit before then. And in that way, thank you for my job. Yeah. And lifelong efforts to serve the Latinx and immigrant populations. He truly leaves a passionate legacy. Would you now please welcome Sylvia and the Alvarez family, who will be accepting on Salvador's induction. Thank you.
I want to thank Ben Cuellar, who nominated my husband for this honor, and the committee of the California Social Hall of Distinction Committee that accepted the nomination. It's an honor for my husband. Unfortunately, he's not here, but he is in spirit. I know he is. And especially because it's brought our family together, our children, my grandchildren, they're on table 4. I have 7, 8, and 6 of my grandchildren present, of my 9, and my children and their spouses. I want to thank them for being here. His sister, brother, their spouses, his cousin, and his dear friend, Herman, very dear friend, because Herman was the one that put the bug in his ear about getting his MSW. So I thank him for being present at our table. And for Edward, who was his older brother, who was his example of leadership when he was growing up in high school, and I always looked to him for that inspiration. So I thank Edward for being here present too, and his daughter. Sal passed away 4.5 years ago. He had suffered a very debilitating illness, but in spite of the illness, he still kept moving forward. And some of the things that I weren't touched in what you have in front of you is how he started. He was born to farm worker family, his mom and his father, Herman, or Armando, and Enriqueta Alvarez, in Santa Maria County Hospital. He was born feet first, or club, or he was born breeched, also with a club leg. At the time, it was very distressing for his mom, because that was something that wasn't expected at all. But luckily, there was a pediatrician, the doctor who helped take care of Sal, that had given him information at Stanford at the Children's Hospital, there was a Dr. Brown who could actually fix his leg, but it would take a series of surgeries that he knew of. But they had to locate themselves to Stanford. They were living in Guadalupe, right next to Santa Maria, and which meant that they had to leave their families that were there, brothers and sisters, to move their family onward to get as close to Stanford as they could. And luckily he had his, the paternal grandfather and grandmother lived in Mountain View. So there was a place to go. Meanwhile, they got his first surgery. So at 2 weeks old, he had his first little cast on his leg. And it took him actually 17 surgeries to straighten out the leg. So every year he had to go in to extend the tendon, extend it some more, until at the end, before he graduated from high school, you wouldn't tell the difference. But his mom, we were fortunate enough that another thing that Sal had in mind before we married, but in his mind he wanted to eventually have a little ranch like he grew up when he was in high school. And when I met him, having that experience that he had with his mom shared that experience with me, that it kind of set the tone for what he wanted to do with his life. He felt a connection to his mom and dad's past as farm workers, and his opportunity came in 1961 when he was able to go to Mexico, part of a group called Amigos Anonymous. And this group was very important because he actually got to go in a bus that was rickety, driving a clutch with no firewall that he shares. And so they took medicine, they took medical supplies, they took clothing, things that could help the families in Mexico to help build schools, repair clinics, provide transportation to hospitals for people who needed to go see a doctor. He didn't speak a word of Spanish. He understood it, but he didn't speak it. So when he got there, it was immersed in the language, which was good because that's what he really needed to do for himself, is to identify with his parents, where they came from. He learned there in Jesus del Campo in Morelia, a little village up in the hills, what it was to live poor, how it was to struggle with very little, if anything. And my husband was very spiritual. He used to go to Mass. Even in high school, he'd stop and go to church before he went to school. And always had this question in his mind as to what was he to do with his life? What was he called to do? When he did his work with Amigos with Jesus del Monte, he realized that he heard his call from Jesus. Is why we have Our Lady Guadalupe here, because she's the patron of Mexico, and actually the Americas, which includes the U.S. as well. Asking what was his purpose, and what he heard was that he was to serve the migrants, the immigrants, the Spanish-speaking that would come to the U.S., and that became his focus. He graduated from college, he went into probation, and that's where he met Herman. And Herman encouraged him to think about getting his master's in social work. So the following year in 64, he entered as social worker 1. So he was basically doing intake and doing very basic at the beginning. I met him in 65 in February, and I wanted to be a social worker. I was 18 and he was 24, so there was a bit of an age gap there. But I really respected and admired the work he was doing. But I also was doing work similar, only neither one of us knew what the other was doing. I was working in East San Jose, in the Sal Si Puedes, where Caesar was when he started his idea of wanting to organize a union. I was there in 64, and he had just left about 2-3 years beforehand. So I worked in CSO, the community service organization that he helped found along with Herman and some other Latino leaders of the time. So as I was working there, Sal had been working at the county welfare department, and he was starting to apply to schools for social work because he didn't really think he could do it, but Herman believed in him. And even when we talked later on, he said he didn't know what Herman saw in him, but Herman believed that Sal would be a good social worker if he got his MSW. But Sal didn't want to be a caseworker. He wanted to be an organizer. So he had his eye on Berkeley, because Berkeley had he could get his MSW in community organization, administration, and policy. And those were the things he loved. So part of what happened was we married. He said he couldn't do this, he couldn't study unless he was married. That would be one thing out of the way for him. So we both went to UC Berkeley. I transferred from San Jose State to UC Berkeley so that we would do the work. And we then what's not in here is that we also founded Quinto Sol. And we were also the first ones that actually helped fund the publication. Because during that time, Latinos were not able to publish their studies, their works, their thesis. So they came to us, and we had some money that we had got from selling a house, and we put that money to create this publication. So now there was a vehicle for our Latino graduate students, those with their dissertations that needed to be published, or those who had their MSWs and had their thesis that wanted to be published. They had a Latino vehicle to do that. So that's one thing that we did as a couple. But then Herman had been working on a committee for the Bishop's Committee for Stockton. And knowing that Sal got an MSW, he got a call to think about maybe working for the Bishop's Committee for the Spanish speaking. Now, what's not in the brochure is the reason it was important at the time is Our Lady was not allowed in some of our churches. She was not accepted. And there were also churches that would not allow our Latinos, our immigrant, or our farm worker young families or families to provide any masses in Spanish, let alone be able to enter the churches. That came as a challenge for Sal, because he had to shake some leaves, make some discomfort, challenge some bishops about the fact that they were supposed to serve all of their flock, not just the growers, but the farm workers that worked for them. And he did. He made some changes. He created some Spanish-speaking parish councils. And from there is when he met Caesar. And that was a profound moment for him. When he went to see Caesar in '68, he had been on the fast, and Sal asked him, what did he need from them, the Bishop's Committee, from the Catholic Conference? What could they do for him? And Caesar turned to him and said, I need a priest. I need a priest. I have the National Farm Worker Ministry. They're wonderful, but they're Protestant. My people are Catholic, and we need a priest. We need someone to give us Mass, to hear confession, to give communion. So Sal went back, and he was able to get a priest from the Franciscans, Father O'Day, Mark O'Day. But that didn't stop. It was meeting someone with so much commitment and so much passion, like Caesar, that he made that internal connection with what he had learned in Mexico. The men that came across the border. Some of them came as braceros, and some of them just came to work in the fields. And he felt that there had to be a change. And Caesar was looking for a union, to create a union. Sal, when I go back a little bit, when Sal went back from getting his master's, he went to work at the Social Welfare Department. He started the Social Workers Union there, Local 535, because he felt the social workers needed to be represented with a union of their own to have the voice. He also created El Comité, because there were certain things that he saw that how some of the clients that were Latino Spanish-speaking families were not being provided all the services that they were entitled to. But they needed a comité, a group of social workers who also saw the same thing. Anyway, I'm getting off track. So, the thrust of our Virgin here is she led us through many things with the farm workers, led us through the work that he did with the School of Social Work that he helped found with the help of Herman Gallegos. He also did a lot of work with our young people, with the foster care system, because he felt it was a broken system. And in his later years, he tried to address that issue. Families were not being put together, but were kept apart. And in the end, just that Sal's compassion, his passion, He was always multitasking. As a deacon, he used the church to level. He wore many hats, his deacon hat, his farm worker hat, his social work hat, and he always used them all to push forward the things that needed to be done to give voice to the voiceless, which were, a lot of them were Mexican families who needed to be represented, and he did.
Thank you for helping us get to know him. It's so special. Appreciate that. Look, before you go far, our next inductee is here for Peter Breen. She is Mary Denton. She is the CEO of Side by Side, an agency where she previously served as the Chief Finance and Administrative Officer. Prior to joining Side by Side, Mary consulted with major international banks and financial institutions in strategy, policy, and business implementation, following a 19-year career at Bank of America in international lending and investment management. She has consulted in the nonprofit sector and formerly served on the board of directors for the Marin Humane Society. Mary is a California native and worked in both New York and Latin America before returning to the Bay Area. Welcome to the stage, Mary Denton.
As CEO of Side by Side, I've worked with Peter for the last 9 years. He is currently the chair and has been on the board of directors for my tenure at Side by Side. His passion, his wisdom, his experience in the field of social welfare for children continue to be a major contributor to the quality and integrity of the work that we do with young people in the Bay Area. One thing you'll see in reading Peter's biography in your program is that he just can't seem to retire. His remarkable career as a social worker and advocate clearly demonstrate his dedication to serving children who have been impacted by adversity. You've read about his leadership of the Child Protective Services program in Los Angeles County, followed by a long tenure as the Marin County Welfare Director. Then, following these many years of public service, he became the executive director of Centerforce, a nonprofit agency serving children with an incarcerated parent throughout the state. And more recently, he has traveled to refugee camps in war-torn areas of the world, bringing the universally recognized and comforting teddy bears to traumatized children in these camps, giving them something to hug, what he calls psychological emergency first aid. Peter's advocacy for the community doesn't stop with caring for children. In the early 1980s, he co-founded the Marin County Safety Network, an affiliation of public and nonprofit human services agencies in Marin. He served 4 terms on the San Anselmo Town Council and as mayor, and I have a resolution to present to him from the San Anselmo Town Council commending his service to the community. He has been a thoughtful proponent for a range of community solutions, including being an early and vocal advocate for the SMART train in Marin, first as a board member and now as a member of its Marin Citizens Oversight Committee. He has promoted innovative transportation solutions on the steering committee of Marin Trolleys, and he adds his voice to the community dialogue on issues as wide-ranging as homelessness and addressing childhood trauma. With the experience gleaned from more than 50 years of executive leadership, Peter has made contributions as a member or chair of boards of directors and advisory councils, too numerous to list. He has been recognized for his volunteerism, including with United Way and the Salvation Army. Peter doesn't wait to be asked to do something. He sees a need and figures out how to bring forward solutions. I am personally grateful for his support in so many ways in my work at Side by Side. And it is not an exaggeration to say that he has made the lives of hundreds of thousands of children so much better. Congratulations, Peter, on this important recognition.
I want to thank Mary. That was very nice. I almost thought I was listening to my obituary. But it was really, really nice, and I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who's here tonight for this presentation, this award. And I want to particularly talk about my friends from the Salvation Army who are sitting back there, Marin Link, who's sitting there, Mary and Side by Side. and we have the one of the former mayors from San Anselmo. There he is. So we have all of the groups here together. When I was told about this, I said, I know I'm not going to try to give a speech about how good social work is and what we've all done, and it's also good, because we have done an outstanding amount of work with very few people. So what I did was I made some cards with dates that I can remember. Some of it's over 50 years. But I had to do it on cards because I couldn't remember any other way to do it. So I'll go back a ways. Some of you will remember this. February 1964, I joined Los Angeles Bureau of Public Assistance as a social worker 1. The salary then was $464 a month. With that, we bought a house and a car. And I did forget to mention my family who's here today, and I really apologize to you all. My wife Ione, my daughter Kate, my brother Tom, his wife Karen, my grandson Drake, my son Leon. Thank you for coming. Anyway, in 1964, I was assigned to Metro South 1. Some of you in Los Angeles will remember that was in the northern part of Watts. August 11th to the 16th, 1965, the initial first Watts riot. We were immediately sent home because clearly the administration did not want a batch of white liberals roaming around during the midst of that horrible, horrible riot. It was a tough, tough situation. We lived just west of Crenshaw Boulevard, for those of you who know, and at nighttime, we could hear the National Guard tanks going down the street. It was a scary time. It was a very scary time. In '65, I was lucky enough to become the roving child welfare worker for Los Angeles County. Okay? Pomona to Long Beach to Palmdale to wherever. And I had my little blue Volkswagen, and it was a joy to do that job because the freeways were always empty when we were called out. We would be called out to pick up a child in an emergency situation, an emergency placement, or possibly sign a medical consent for a child whose parents were not available and the doctor couldn't do anything until we took them into custody. So we did that. And one of the things I always remember was a child, she was about 9, that LAPD had called us and said she has to be removed from her home and taken to a foster home. That didn't sound really tough to me. Trouble is, the home was in the middle of Watts. So I loaded up my little blue Volkswagen, went down, met the officers, and we got in the car, and one of the officers said, I'll be in back and you be, and my partner will be in front. So across the center of the project, we go with sirens screaming, and here's my little blue Volkswagen, and this beautiful little child in it. And if you can picture the geography of Watts, it was about 8 miles from the ocean. And she said to me, I've never seen the ocean. So I drove out that way before I went to the foster home. That was kind of fun. 1966. The first social worker strike in Los Angeles County. We struck for 30 days. We were terrified because we were the first public agency in California to go on an extended strike. If any of you remember then, and I'll forgive you, NASW refused to sanction our strike. That's all I'll say. Nancy Humphreys and I had a lot of talks about that over the years. 1966 again, my fieldwork experience. I was at USC then. And I was a graduate of the 1967 class. And we had probably about 35 or 40. One of my stellar graduates was Suzanne Dvorak Peck, who is now literally financing the School of Social Welfare. During that time in my fieldwork experience, I had a child that I had to work with for a year as my fieldwork experience. And this child was Donald. I won't tell you his last name. He was a child of 2 probation officers in Los Angeles County who had been relinquished at birth because he was born without arms. He was a delightful child. We used to go up to UCLA about every 3 months to get the prosthetics changed because he was like a little bird. Then we would go to Hamburger Hamlet and have a hamburger. And Donald would go, like this with the hamburger. It was amazing. So these are just some of the things that I remember. Okay, it rained on the day that I went to Marin County. I remember that, so I'm telling you just the facts as I remember them. 86, I was elected the president of the American Public Welfare Association. 1986, I forget the exact day, or 85 I think it was, I testified in front of Bob Doyle on behalf of food stamps. And that was kind of terrifying for me because I had a lot of respect for, and I still do have a lot of respect for Bob Doyle. Then another time I went to the Union Station in Washington, D.C. And if you have been there, you know the downstairs is all a food court, a huge food court. There might be maybe 30 or 40 different restaurants down there. I went in for coffee, and I felt very strange. Out of 400,000 black men in Washington, D.C., I was the only white person, I thought. It really, really was an awakening for me. I really began to understand what this is all about, what it's about, and what the Million Man March was about. 2003, I retired from Center Force. That's the prison visiting agency that I headed. And I think I can say something that nobody else in this room can say. I have been in and sat down and been entertained at all 33 state prisons in California. Pretty good, huh? But the 33 prisons also had 33 family visitor centers, and that was the agency that I ran. So that was wonderful. Let's see if I have any other cards here. No. Oh, I can talk just a real bit about the Syria thing. The teddy bears to Syria. We went to, my wife and I and some other people went to Syria to hand out the teddy bears to the Syrian refugee children. We took 5,000 teddy bears with us. One day we went up to Irbid, which is about 5 miles from the border, and it's just full of refugee camps. We were on the 3rd floor of a social services agency that didn't have glass windows, it had barred windows. We were on the 3rd floor. The word got out that something was free at the agency. I have never been so scared in my whole life when about 5,000 people descended on this building, and they're all just hysterical, and there is no way you can deal 911. You just have to push the door open. We got out to our little Mercedes-Benz bus, got on it, and this one kid picked up a rock about that big and was ready to throw it at us. And it was the feeling of, I don't know what we can do. We just have to let it go. So I just thought I'd give you, some examples of what's happened in one person's social work career. 55 good years. My wife has said, don't use that story again, but I have to do it. I think Herman Gallegos, weren't you involved in the housing stuff in San Francisco? I was involved. Okay. The thing that I didn't mention was all of this happened because of myself babysitting my daughter on the day that Kennedy was killed. I sat in front of that TV for 3 days, and 3 weeks later, I left the farm in Gilroy and said, we're going to do something good. And so here I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Congratulations. And thank you for by the way.
Oh, yeah.
The field program.
Yeah.
For Ben Cuellar, our next presenter is David Foster, who also traveled miles to join us, and we're very grateful for his participation. Dr. Foster is a licensed clinical social worker with over 28 years' experience in public child welfare as a social worker, supervisor, educator, and administrator. He was the Title 40 project coordinator at CSU Fresno's social work program and a founding member of the California Regional Training Academy's Development and Implementation Project, and is its current director, linking public human service directors with research, policy analysis, and training support services.
Thank you, Catherine, for that nice introduction. And having been on campus at Fresno State since 1993, I'm sensitive to titles, so I appreciate you granting me the PhD, but actually I don't have one, so I should mention that, because otherwise rumors will get back to campus, and that's not a good thing, as many of you know. So, but this is indeed a incredible honor for me to be here and introduce Ben Cuellar to you as a member of the class of Hall of Distinction 2019. And I have to say I'm incredibly humbled just to be here and be with you and this audience. It's amazing. Incredible stories and incredible history of social work. Perhaps you don't appreciate how amazing you are, but for someone who was a student and grew up in social work and has spent many years in it, I'm amazed to be here. So it's quite an awesome experience. But beyond that, awesome is a great word about being able to introduce Ben Cuellar, who I've known for many years, and I hope you'll take a opportunity to look at his biography in the program. The things that distinguish him are so vast, it would take too long for me to kind of recap them for you. So I won't try to, but if you read them, I know that you'll see that he has quite a lengthy list of accomplishments. And I met Ben really shortly after he arrived in Fresno, and it's really special today because many of his children, grandchildren, and their spouses, his children's spouses, are here, so you'll see them over at the table with him, and it's great to have them. I also have met and known them for many years as well, so he has a great family and a great network of family support as well. There's no question that Ben embodies the spirit of the Hall with a list of accomplishments that distinguish him as a champion of the underserved communities and a passionate advocate for cultural competence in social work policy and practice. But those of you that have spent even a small amount of time with Ben can't help but notice, or couldn't help but notice, his tireless energy and persistent focus on finding innovative ways to use partnerships to address the many community and social justice needs in the Central California region as well as throughout the state of California. You'll note that the accomplishments are highlighted by calling him a leader in organizational collaboration. And collaboration is what Ben is best known for: partnerships, collaboration, relationships. And those of us that have worked with him on campus know Ben and found out early that he was a man on a mission, always. Working creatively, thinking constantly, collaborating endlessly, and likely to call us anytime, day or night, with an idea on how to improve things. Likely to show up in our office at a moment's notice with a smile on his face and with an idea that he had in his head and wanted us to share with him. So Ben was a visionary and a quintessential macro practitioner, and although he was those things, he always remembered his roots. He always tried to provide opportunity, open doors, and mentor promising young students, faculty, and practitioners. That's the part of Ben that I remember the most myself. I am indeed fortunate, as are many others, to have had the advantage of your mentoring been your friendship, and to share in your passion. And I speak for many when I say, although my Spanish is not great, but I say gracias por todo, Dean Cuellar, and congratulations on this well-deserved honor. Please come forward.
Thank you for those very kind words, Dave. Okay, I want to thank the California Social Work Hall of Distinction Committee for selecting me as one of the individuals to be recognized here today. I also want to thank all of my family, friends, and colleagues who are here today. I could not have achieved what I did during my 40 years of service as a social worker, educator, and dean without their support, participation, and contributions. As David mentioned, much of my family is here on table 2, and I really couldn't have achieved what I did without their support and participation. There are many people who were important to me during my personal and professional journey. At the top of my list are my father, Cesario Cuellar, and my wife, Julia Renteria Cuellar. My father, an immigrant farm worker from Mexico, kept our family of 6 children together after our mother Maria died. After our mother Maria, also an immigrant from Mexico, died in 1946 when I was 4 years old. My wife Julia, now deceased, supported me in every way possible during my educational and professional journey. She was also an immigrant from Mexico who came here when she was 8 years old. She was a farm worker with an 8th grade education when we got married in 1965. 3 decades later, she earned her MSW. As did 2 of my sons, Trinidad and Benjamin, there was a time when there was 4 MSWs in the family. We were a social work family. Okay. My other 3 children, Christopher, Daniel, and Concepcion, are also involved in health and human service professional areas. One is a county employee assistant specialist, a nursing clinical supervisor of a progressive care floor of a major regional hospital, and a corporate human relations director. They and my 5 grandkids are my greatest joy and accomplishment. I also owe a debt of gratitude to many people who have supported me and mentored me during my life and career. Social work was a great career choice for me. It fit me like a glove and provided me with many opportunities and great satisfaction and fulfillment. It also provided me with the opportunity to work with individuals like Dr. Rondero Hernandez, Andrew Carlin, Betty Garcia, Bertha Gonzalez, David and Barbara Foster, Dr. Jane Middleton, Imogene Carson, among others, who contributed greatly to many of the accomplishments of the Department of Social Education and the College of Health and Human Services during my tenure there from 1988 to 2009. It's a long time. Okay. Again, I'd like to thank the HOD committee and those who nominated me for the recognition I am receiving today. It has been a long but great journey to getting here today. I want to thank all of you who are here today to recognize all of the 6 inductees, and I look forward to seeing many of you again at the next ceremony in next year. Thank you very much.
Our next honoree is Dr. Joelle Taylor Gibbs. And I want to welcome to the stage my colleague, Dr. Kurt Organista, professor in the School of Social Welfare at UC Berkeley, where his focus is on Latinx psychosocial and health problems. Dr. Organista teaches courses on stress and coping, psychopathology, race, ethnic relations, and social work practice with Latinx populations. He conducts and edits research in the area of HIV prevention with Latino migrant workers and day laborers. He is also one of the most genuine and gregarious members of the Berkeley faculty, having indulged my email communication attempts in rusty Spanish over the years, as well as sitting with me and others who shall remain nameless, but at least one is here, in the bad kids corner at many a graduation and faculty meeting. That's the back corner where folks can exchange whispers, much the way our students do when they think we can't see them. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Organista.
Like our other inductees today, Joelle Taylor Gibbs is being honored for her immense scholarship and her significant impacts on society. But there are so many other qualities that we admire in Joelle. For instance, we were always excited about her impeccable sense of fashion at the school. We've been missing that, and fortunately, our new dean, Linda Burton, is bringing that back to the school. So thank you, Linda. What I would like to say is there's a couple of qualities that I want to mention in tandem. One is, Joelle, I always admired your ability to speak truth to power, and that was usually in faculty meeting after faculty meeting after faculty meeting. But no matter how contentious some of those faculty meetings got, they could never diminish Joelle's exuberance and just her joyful approach to life. And for those of you who know and love Joelle, that exuberance was quite, how would you say, audible? Quite audible. In fact, Joelle and I share, we had offices next to each other in the corner of Haviland Hall. And if you were standing out in the hallway, you could often hear Joelle talking to her students, talking on the phone, even with the door closed. And not to be outdone, I always had my rock and roll CDs playing with a very heavy emphasis on Latino rock and roll. And Joelle, I see you talking to Kathy, but I just wanted to, I don't know if you remember this or if you even know this, but one day the office between ours, the corner office between ours, became available, and all the faculty were looking at it. And one of our distinguished faculty members, Dr. Eileen Gambrell, does anybody know that name? She went over there and she said, "Oh my God, beautiful office. It's got 2 big windows. It's a corner. I'm taking it." She was so excited, started to move her books in. And so one day I was leaving my office and I see I see Eileen outside our offices, and she's looking and listening. She has this very pained look on her face. And what you have to understand about Eileen is she hated noise. She just hated noise. And she looked at, and I said, "Eileen, what's wrong? Are you okay?" And she said, "Between your music and Joelle talking, I am out of here." And I said, "You mean you don't like Santana? What is the problem here?" So she marched out. Did you know this story? It's made me chuckle over the years. The one thing I want to make sure to say to you, Joelle, is I want to thank you for inviting me to interview you for the California Social Work Archives. We had a wonderful 2 hours together. I got to listen to all the remarkable details of your extraordinary life story. And what I want to say most of all is, as I was listening to Joelle during the interview time, I experienced over and over what it was like, or what it's like, to be in the presence of greatness. Thank you, Joelle.
Well, if you know Joelle, you know it takes more than one person to introduce her. That's all. Thank you, Kurt. I just had a whole speech ready, but it's fine. I should say I am Gwen Foster. I was a fieldwork consultant and lecturer at the School of Social Welfare, which is where I met Joelle, I think in about 1983. I was a mid-career professional coming into the school, and I didn't think I had any need for being mentored. I was already launched, except that I'd never taught a course before, and I'd never worked in academia. Joelle took me to lunch, gave me her social work practice syllabus. I learned what a syllabus was at that point, and mentored me anyway for many, many years. As you know from your program, Dr. Gibbs is best known for 2 books, Young, Black, and Male in America and Endangered Species from 1988, and then a year later produced an edited collection of work with Dr. Lark Wong called Children of Color, Psychological Interventions with Minority Youth. The second book pioneered the use of the term children of color that has become sort of an embedded part of our lexicon these days, but that came from Joelle and Lark. Joelle chaired many committees at the School of Social Welfare, and many of those are well known in your program. I should say that one of the committees that she chaired was the status of women and ethnic minorities. And the SWIM committee, under her leadership, identified key obstacles in increasing diversity among students, faculty, and administration, and pushed the university to move toward changing some discriminatory practices of university committees. I suspect that they appointed Joelle thinking that she would just go over there and be quiet, but they didn't know her. Right. Joelle was the first African-American woman, or first African-American to hold an endowed chair at the University of California system as the first Zellerbach Family Fund Professor of Social Policy, Community Change, and Practice. She was selected by the Foundation for her scholarly research on minority youth and families. The Foundation's executive director was Ed Nathan, whom some of you may remember. He was also a social worker. And he and the board saw an opportunity to demonstrate the benefits of diversity among faculty selected for these prestigious positions. And they started with Joelle, and it has continued since then. Let me just conclude by saying that Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whom Joelle met as an undergraduate at Radcliffe, and for whom she raised money for the Montgomery Boycott Association. But Dr. King once said, "Joelle doesn't need any champagne. She makes her own bubbles and energizes everyone around her." Her body of work clearly shows this, and it's fair to say that she has energized all of us to create and deliver the highest quality practices and social policies that improve opportunities for vulnerable populations, and to keep finding ways of being of service no matter what.
Thank you so much to Gwen and to Kurt for those lovely introductions. I really do admire the fact that they are still active in social work and that they have both made their own contributions. Now, speaking of time, I noticed that everybody else has gone a little bit over that 5 minutes. And it reminds me of an anecdote from my teaching days. On the day of the 1989 earthquake that many of you remember, I was teaching a class at Haviland Hall, which is a very big, sturdy hall, from 4 to 6. And I had promised my students I'd let them out at 5 o'clock because of the game. You remember there was a big game that day? And so I was running a little bit over when we had the first wave. And I was used to earthquakes, so I didn't think anything of it, although 2 very stout young men got under one little table and tried to hide. And they said, "What is that, Professor Gibbs?" I said, "Oh, that's just a little earthquake. Don't worry about it. I'm talking about Freud, so give me 5 more minutes." Well, they gave me 5 more minutes, and in 5 more minutes there was a second wave, and we had in the hall, some of you may know, a measurement device for earthquakes. A young man came and stood in my door and said, "Professor Gibbs, do you realize we have just had a 7.0 earthquake? Would you please let your students go?" So time is always important. First, let me thank let me read. Let me thank the California chapter of the Social Work Hall of Distinction for this induction, for inducting me and these other wonderful people who have contributed so much to social work. I'm honored to be among this year's inductees, and I would like to express my thanks also to the Social Work Archives and to USC School of Social Work, especially Jennifer Chung Banzini for all the hard work for planning this program. When I began, but first of all, can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. I usually don't have a problem with that. When I began my career in social work in 1970 as a clinical social worker at Stanford University's Cowell Health Center, the winds of cultural change were well underway in the Bay Area, from the free speech movement at UC Berkeley to the free love movement of the hippies in the Haight-Ashbury and at San Francisco, to the free everything movement of the Black Panthers in Oakland. California was at the epicenter of the Cultural Revolution, and the profession of social work was forced to respond to the demands of emerging communities with new problems, different cultural perspectives, and different attitudes toward traditional institutions. As I reminisce about my 20-year career as a faculty member at the School of Social Welfare at UC Berkeley, I realize how much those cultural changes affected my own teaching, practice, and research. I focused most of my research and teaching on the social and psychological problems of marginalized and underserved youth of color and their families. From my first book on young Black males, where I proposed an ecological and sociological perspective to evaluate the many dysfunctional systems in which they were often enmeshed from childhood, including poverty, racial segregation, poor schools, neglected communities, etc. By reframing their behaviors as expectable responses to these systems, it was very useful in reshaping policies and programs of intervention to reverse the cycle of self-destructive behaviors and failures in many of these youth. Long before the term culturally competent was coined, I was teaching and writing about the importance of understanding and respecting a client's culture in order to develop an appropriate intervention for her or her family. In 1989, as Gwen Foster mentioned, my colleague Lark Wang and I proposed a multi-dimensional model of assessment for youth and families of color, taking into account their race, ethnicity, language, social class, immigration status, and other systems impacting their ability to function in the community. We emphasize that, quote unquote, one model does not fit all. And now training in cultural sensitivity and cultural competence is required in nearly all health and mental health professions. And by the way, the book is still available. Third edition. As was pointed out earlier, I believe I may have had the most impact at Berkeley in my role as chair and co-chair of the Committee on the Status of Women and Ethnic Minorities, also called SWEM. Now, if you put I instead of E in there, you'd understand how hard it was, swimming up, current. This committee monitored the hiring and retention of women and people of color as tenure-track faculty members at UC Berkeley. Through collecting data and developing a range of effective strategies, our committee was able to record an increase in the number of women and people of color, or sometimes people who were TwoFers, on the UCB faculty. In fact, we were so successful that I was appointed to the system-wide SWEM committee to tackle the same issues throughout the 9 campuses. At that time, there were only 9. Now there is Merced. I also played, I think, an important role in changing the undergraduate curriculum, even though I never taught undergraduates, by the way, but I helped to change the curriculum by introducing the American Cultures course. This is a required course for all undergraduates in the humanities and social sciences and the arts, in which they compare the dominant Euro-American society to at least one other ethnic group in American society. These courses, which now are in most major universities, introduce undergraduates to the literature, history, and art of other major racial and ethnic groups in American society. Demographers have predicted that the United States will become a minority-majority society by 2050. But California has already reached that description. So it is fitting that California universities should take the lead in developing new models of teaching and learning for our students to compete in an increasingly globalized world. Finally, I would like to thank so many people who have contributed to the development and success of my own career. First, of course, my parents. I'm a preacher's kid with all of that good things that means. And my parents certainly always really inspired us to do good in the community and to share whatever we had with those who were less fortunate. My colleagues, I would like to thank because they were always supportive. My students who were always engaged, and I am so proud of my students, many of them who are here. I wish those of you who ever took a course with me would raise your hand. And some are now deans, professors, policymakers, all over the state of California and the nation. And whenever I would go to teach at other schools, I would meet my students who are on the faculty. And I have 3 more sentences, which I will read. Thank you. And also, I would like to thank the administrators and staff members, especially my secretary, Sharon Economy, who typed all of my handwritten manuscripts for all 5 books. And I didn't become literate in the computer until I retired. Last but not least, I must thank my beautiful family for all their support and interest in my careers over the years. My husband, Jim, would my family please stand? My husband, Jim, who learned to cook and even moved to San Francisco for 4 years so I could get tenure. My 2 sons, Jeffrey and Lowell, who were the wind beneath my wings and other things. And they supplied many anecdotes in my courses about adolescence, which they would be dying to hear. My daughter-in-law, who's not well today, and her 2 beautiful children, stand up, my 2 grandchildren, Julian and Rico, who bring the multicultural energy and vitality to our family. And finally, in September, I had life-changing surgery, and which you can see from my being in a wheelchair. And my family and friends and many of you in the audience, including many of my former students, have encircled me with love and support, and I know that they will be there for me as I face some new winds of change and a new challenge and adjust to a new reality in my own life. Thank you very much.
Okay, as they exit, I'm going to say, in keeping with our theme of excellence in social work practice, we're going to bring up Renee Mack. She's an LCSW who currently works at Napa State Hospital as a clinical psychiatric social worker. She's also a doctoral candidate at the UC Berkeley School of Social Welfare. And she's here to describe Professor Jim Midgley, Our former dean, whom she's known as both a teacher and a mentor and a friend for almost a decade.
Being a social worker at the beginning of my career, what can I say about someone who's internationally renowned and whose career has spanned 5 decades and 3 continents? But when I think about Jim Midgley, the person, and I think about the mentorship and character he's shown me throughout the 8 years that I've known him, I thought it made perfect sense for me to introduce him. Because despite his civility and global fame, Jim Midgley remains a man committed to not only the advancement of social work education, and social development, but the advancement of the next generation of social workers and scholars. And I can speak to this firsthand, because as a confused MSW student, Jim took pity on me. He'd invite me into his office, which was decorated like the quintessential Berkeley professor, I might add, with oil paintings from South Africa and handmade rugs from India. But it was in this office that I first began to feel like I belonged at Berkeley, because Jim treated me like a young colleague and friend rather than a know-nothing student or a nuisance. And it was in this office that I started to learn from Jim more than just social welfare theory and how to manage undergraduate anxieties, but I learned how to be consistent and an encouraging mentor. Jim also shared with me his warmth as a person and what he had to overcome to get to where he is now. He noticed my recent heart surgery scar, and he shared with me that he had rheumatic fever as a child in South Africa, which almost killed him had it not been for his father, who was a country doctor and administered a little-known drug, penicillin, at the time. He also shared with me what it was like to grow up in Cape Town during apartheid, and to attend college under a regime of suspicion, surveillance, and oppression. An experience that continues to influence his scholarship and view of social welfare today. I also learned about his education and the mentorship he'd received from Richard Titmuss at the London School of Economics as a student and professor. And it was during these conversations that I began to understand his commitment to social welfare education and his doggedness at bringing resources to young California MSW students and securing Title IV funding for the school and the state. Soon, our conversations outgrew his office, and they moved to his favorite cafe on Euclid, Nafali's, if anyone's familiar. And it was here that I got to learn about his accomplished and sassy wife, Didja. And after meeting Didja at their beautiful home in Montclair, I truly understood how Jim could be such a happy and giving human. So I want to take this time to not only introduce Jim Midgley into this appropriately titled Hall of Distinction, but to thank him and his wife, Didja, for the grace and hospitality they've shown me over the years. And I'm truly flattered to be invited here tonight to share this honor with you.
Renee, for those generous words. I must tell you that one of the joys, or let me say privileges, I'm sure Joel would agree and Kurt would agree, of the academic life is to work with people like Renee and to see her getting ready to get a doctoral degree and move on to a prestigious faculty position. And we wish you all the very best. All the very best to you. I'd like to quickly thank the very good people who nominated me for this honor, and also the committee for selecting me. I know there were many other candidates. Kathy Ralph, Jan Lee Rong, I think Renee also wrote a letter of support for me. Jeff Edelson, our former dean, and our student president at the time, Amanda Cedron, who has since moved on, is now out of state. I would also like to acknowledge and congratulate our colleagues being inducted into the Hall of Distinction today, sitting here and listening to the very, very impressive things that you have done and the way you have represented the profession. Well-deserved recognition. I'd just particularly like to say to Joel, congratulations. I remember when I was appointed dean, she came and said to me, "Jen, I know where all the skeletons are buried." And that was a lovely way of opening up, my new role as dean, and we had many, many pleasant conversations. She gave good advice, sound counsel, and it's been such a pleasure to know her over the years, and her husband, Jim. Thank you for your friendship. I would also like to welcome Linda Burton, and...
She's over here on this side.
Oh, you moved. I thought you were... Sorry, I got my reading glasses on, so I can't see too far. But really want to welcome you and wish you all the very best for your tenure as dean. I know you will move the school forward to new heights of excellence. I'd like to recognize colleagues and friends from the school. It's another one of the privileges of academic life, to meet such wonderful people, such interesting people, such intelligent and capable people. And a number have come today to join us here. They bring so many really joyful memories back. And when I came in the hall, I saw old friends from CalSWIC, old friends from other programs, and just such a warm feeling to know that we're still connected through these events. I have very fond memories of, for example, visiting the National Museum in Taiwan with Julian Chow, and going through hallway of the most fabulous art, thousands of years of Chinese art. And I've enjoyed Julian's company on many occasions, as well as the friendship of Kitty, his wife, Kitty Ho. I have fond memories of driving in Rafael Herrera's little blue pickup. I don't know if you remember your little blue pickup. Up to Sonoma, we were in the search for a very fine bottle of 1922 Madeira. We found it, and we enjoyed it with Meg and some other friends. Great memories. Of course, having breakfast with Kurt every now and then at the egg shop in Montclair, again, kindles many memories indeed. And it's so nice to have them as our neighbors. Hope you weren't too inconvenienced with the power cuts the other day. I only thought of you. But thanks for your friendship and that of Pam. I could go on like this. There's so many memories that flood in at this time. But then I'd get the dong from you. So let me just mention that one of the wonderful things that happened during my tenure as dean was strengthening an international visitor program. We brought distinguished scholars from all over the world to Berkeley for a semester or 2 semesters. And one of our visiting scholars, is actually here today, James Lee, with his wife Angela. We were actually together at the London School of Economics in the early 1980s, when I was a very young lecturer, but I was supposed to be their professor. And we've remained friends over all these years, and it's been wonderful. And I remember when you were at Berkeley as a visiting professor, I also remember the conferences we've attended, the trips we made to China to build relationships with social work schools in a number of Chinese universities. I'd like to introduce very quickly Catherine Hutter-Gordon, who's joined us at our table. Catherine is one of the school's major donors. She and her family endowed the Hutter-Patterson Chair, which Julian Chow now occupies. And I remember in my final years at Berkeley, my last 2 years, Renee and I worked on establishing an undergraduate program, not in social work, but to help undergraduates coming to the campus acclimatize, meet each other, and so on. And Catherine generously financed that program. I would also and really want to acknowledge the contribution and friendship of Jim Steele, who was assistant dean at the School of Social Welfare. Now, I heard you tell Linda Burton 28 years. Is that right? For many years, I certainly remember that. He supported Harry Specht. He saw me through. And I can honestly say that my tenure as dean at Berkeley would not have been, should I use the word successful, but without Jim Steele. We would not have been able to make so much progress. We recruited new faculty, increased the salaries of our field colleagues. We secured accreditation for the MSW program twice. We supported faculty research. We raised funds for student fellowships. That was the #1 priority of my deanship exceeding $11 million. And best of all, for my successor, Jim left a very large budget surplus. Jim has also been a very dear personal friend to us. When I first came to Berkeley, I mentioned to him that I would be looking for a house. Well, he put us in his car, my wife and I, Didju and I, drove us all over the Montclair Hills where he'd grown up, shared his knowledge with us, and guess what? We bought a house in the Montclair Hills, and we're still there today, living in this very beautiful place. Finally, I want to thank my wife, my life partner, and my best friend, Khadija. Excuse me, I'm drying up a little bit. That's you, darling, Khadija. For all your support, love, and encouragement. I owe more to you than I can say. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy.
Annie Chung is up next. She's been the president and CEO of Self-Help for the Elderly since 1981. Self-Help began serving seniors in San Francisco's Chinatown community in 1966 as a War on Poverty program. Today, they serve over 40,000 older adults each year in San Francisco. Also in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Alameda counties. Annie is a familiar figure in the San Francisco Bay Area, hosting her own weekly public affairs TV program called The Chinese Journal on KTSF Channel 26.
Although I've known you, Linda, for a long time, since I joined Self-Help for the Elderly in the late 1970s, I thought I know her pretty well. But even now, I find that Linda has so many talents that she's been hiding from us. For example, she's a great cook. And in her spare time, she'll be cooking up a storm for Ling Chi, her children, and her grandchildren. Just 2 weeks ago, a few of my board members, May, our board chair, is here with me today. We interrupted Linda cooking the ossobuco, a dish that I can't even pronounce. I have to ask May and Dr. Low about 5 times how to pronounce it. And one told me it's oxtail, and the other told me it's veal. So I don't know exactly what it is. Veal, okay, Linda said veal. And I think Linda was cooking that for her daughter, but we brought her out of her house to join us for lunch that day. Sometimes I would call Linda because I have a question for her, or I need her to sign a few checks as our board chair. And then Linda would be making cookies with her grandchildren, or cooking, or shopping in Chinatown for ingredients for some of the favorite dishes for her family. I think as you read her biography in the program book, besides all of Linda's professional achievement as Director of Adult Community Services at the Department of Public Health's Community Mental Health Division in San Francisco, she's also chair of the iHotel Citizens Committee for 28 years until the project was finally built on Kearny Street. If you ever happen to come to Chinatown, please visit. It's a beautiful multi-story new building on Kearny where they house over 100-some seniors. Some were evicted from that big iHotel struggle many years ago. And also, Self-Help for the Elderly ran a senior center there. And with Linda's help, we were able to relocate back to the iHotel. So thank you, Linda, for that. Linda was also our board chair, and because we have some board terms, then sometimes she would step down from our board, and very quickly I would ask her to join our housing board, which is a different board. And then when that term is up, then I'll ask her to join our Alzheimer Residential Care Home Board. So it's anything for us to keep Linda on our board. She's a really good sport, and Linda will. Linda, I know that you're professionally very, very successful, but to all of us, your friends and your family, you're going to be known always as the best mom, the best grandmother, the best cook, and of course, the best partner for Professor Duck and Professor Ling Chi Wang. To me personally, Linda is very special. She has supported, mentored, and taught me and other staff at Self-Help for the Elderly so much. She has been volunteering for Self-Help since the 70s and serving on our various boards, most of the time as board chair. She helped me recruit and train new board members and is always there for the staff when we need her. Her commitment to our seniors is unmatched. Linda's personal philosophy of helping people who have experienced loss is to provide support and a sense of community whenever possible. This is evident in both her role at the Department of Mental Health as well as all of the different causes and charitable organizations that she is involved with. Building a healthier and sustainable community for the minority, the underserved, the limited English speakers, the immigrants, and the senior population. Linda has been leading the way, and many of us just follow her. Linda, we're so proud of you being the honoree today. You have been our fearless and dedicated leader, and our community is far better off now because of your tenacity and your tireless efforts. Thank you and congratulations.
This is kind of like waiting for a job interview that's been delayed. I very much want to thank the committee for this honor. But I have to tell you, I stand in awe at all the other inductees and what they have done in their careers and in their lives. And I can't believe I'm being honored like this. I mean, congratulations to all of you for a job well done. I have to tell you, I've been very, very fortunate. I had a father who came to the US in 1925. In 1925, the US immigration law only allowed 105 Chinese to come to this country legally. My father did not come into this country under this law. But as a result of his hoping to have a better life and wishing for his family to have a better life, I was able to get a very good education from the public schools, amazingly, from the public schools in San Francisco. And I went to Berkeley. I went to Lewis and Clark College, went back to Berkeley, and graduated there, and then went to the University of Chicago, where I was again fortunate to have a wonderful first-year fieldwork instructor by the name of Thomas Nelson. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Obviously, I had lots of family support. My husband, Ling Chi, our kids, who were very patient about allowing me to go to, it seems like, countless meetings. They probably were countless meetings. But they also allowed me to follow my passion. I am part of a Chinatown community, the Chinese community. And many of you may think of Chinatown, San Francisco, as a tourist place, which it is. But in that community lived thousands of seniors in single-room occupancy hotels, and many hundreds of families, immigrant families, who had just arrived and also were occupying single rooms, sharing baths, in really run-down buildings. And I had this crazy notion before I went to the University of Chicago. I knew about the housing situation, and I was worried that by the time I finished my work on my degree, the housing problems would get solved, and I would come back and I would have to think of what else I wanted to do. Well, obviously, I was mistaken, because it took 10 years for a project on Stockton and Sacramento streets by the Stockton Street Tunnel to get built. 10 years of lobbying for funding from HUD, for lobbying local as well as federal to support this, because the senior housing and family housing in Chinatown was just below standard. But 10 years it took. And there were people who joined me in that struggle, and we worked together. This is how it works in a community. We work together. And I also had a day job, which was, I worked for child welfare. I worked for Chinese Hospital, a community hospital, and I worked for the public health department in mental health. I also had the wonderful opportunity of, and actually lengthy, it felt like a life sentence, of being appointed on the iHotel Citizens Advisory Committee. This went on from 1979 until folks like Helen Bautista managed with us as a committee to make something happen. We got funding for senior housing, and it took till 2005. Long time. It only took a few days to knock down the International Hotel. It took one night to evict the Filipino and Chinese seniors from that hotel. Just a few days, and suddenly the hotel was gone. It took 28 years from the time of the eviction in 1977 for housing again to be built on that site. So we have that, and then we have mental health. Mental health, as you know, is a big issue, particularly, I think, in San Francisco. You see homeless, mentally ill on the streets. We did our very best. I have colleagues here who fought the good fight with me, fighting budget cuts, trying to still provide an array of services so that not only people who were residents, but people who were homeless could access mental health and substance abuse services. And we tried our very best to be culturally competent and to have the diversity in staff that would allow that to happen. So in 2005, when I retired, I was ready. It had been a very hard journey, but a very rewarding journey, but really tough. You know, I hope I've made a little contribution through this time period. But I have to say, I started with the immigration of my father. We have today an administration that is so cruel that it will separate children from their parents without cause. It's just that they showed up at our doors, at our ports of entry. we still have racist immigration policies. And hopefully that will change in 2020. We still have mentally ill. We still have housing that needs to be built. And we look forward to the next generation and to the schools of social work to do their job and help us move it forward.
I have to say, what an afternoon we've had. Our inductees always shine a light on the power of individual workers to affect social change. They reflect our potential for social work as a profession to change the world. And these induction ceremonies themselves inspire and make me feel proud to be a social worker, and a feeling that I think permeates this room after we've heard all these stories. As our event draws to a close, and on behalf of the Hall of Distinction Committee, I'd like to congratulate our newest members of the Hall of Distinction and extend our sincerest thanks to their family and friends for sharing the experience this afternoon, to Colleen Friend, the most aptly named social worker, for her leadership and passion for this work as the chair of the Hall of Distinction Committee, Jennifer Chung-Vanzini, our chief logistics organizer for this event, bringing it to life and making it all happen in under 2 hours. Well, actually went over 2 hours. And most of all, thank you to all of you who joined us today for your support and commitment to social work and the social workers in California. Be aware that the 2020 nominations for inductees for next year's Hall of Distinction are now open. Please consider nominating a social work hero of yours who has made a widespread impact on Californians. The nomination forms are on our website, information in your program. Deadline for submission is January 15th. The induction of members into the Hall alternates each year between Northern and Southern California and is held in conjunction with the NASW California Chapter Conference. So next year we'll be in Southern California, so you're thinking of maybe some recipients for next year who might be in that area. Look on the inside back cover of your program for the Learn More and Keep in Touch page, and you'll find updated photos and info on securing those photos when you go to those pages. Thank you so much for joining us today, and be careful on your way out.